الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدي وحبيبي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Welcome and I hope that you and your families are well and safe. Jazakumullah khairan for participating in this follow-up session to our workshop. This is a discussion based workshop today where inshallah we will feature two main research talks. The first one, inshallah, will be by Sister Lisa about researching Waqf using Maqasid methodology. And the second, Sister Iman and I will present energy and environment in the Islamic worldview. The structure of today's workshop, inshallah ta'ala, is that we'll have each speaker or each talk. We have two talks. We'll have each talk take 15 to 20 minutes, followed with discussion, questions, follow-up points, feedback from Professor Jasser, and then we go and conduct the second talk, inshallah. Similarly, engage in more discussion, give feedback, ask questions, also receive feedback from Professor Jasser, inshallah ta'ala. This workshop, as I mentioned, is part of the workshop package, the Maqasid Institute Education program that we have. So alhamdulillah, we started a few months ago with weekends workshops that where we have been introduced and slightly trained on the methodology. And today, inshallah, we'll be exploring the methodology a little bit more intimately, and have a close-up about it. And the objective of today as well is to take whatever feedback that's important for us. If you, I mean, there were opportunities for written feedback, but because we have time after the two talks, we'll open it for more discussion. If you have more questions, feedback about the methodology that you would like to engage in, inshallah. طيب, without further ado, inshallah, I will give the floor to our sister Lisa to, and I've given you co-host capacity, so please go ahead and the floor is yours.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Azam. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Jazakumullah khairan for Prof. Jasser, Auda, and all their friends in the Maqasid Research Institute. Thank you for the opportunity. So my name is Lisa. So I attend last session with Prof. Jasser, and mashallah, I benefit a lot. And I think that this methodology is also very suitable for with my research area. I'm doing research on Waqf. Last few days I just finished 5 files, alhamdulillah, and my PhD research is also about Waqf, specifically about governance of Waqf authority. So after attending Prof. Jasser class about the Maqasid methodology, I think that it is very relevant, and I'm wondering how it can be applied in my research area. So initially, when I submitted the abstract, I hope that I can get feedback and guidance on how to do this research and to complete this research. So in this opportunity, I would like to share the latest development and also the research about Waqf and how it can relate with the Maqasid methodology. So this is the outlines that I would like to present in this session. So I will start first with our phenomena that we are facing today. While Muslim in terms of number are huge, but most of the time we have a dependency issue. Like in terms of economy, for example, we have dependency in terms of our even basic needs. Like because I'm Indonesia, so I give an illustration on how this very big country in which it is represent the most Muslim majority country, but still we also have not been independent even to fulfill our basic needs. Like for example, in terms of food, we are still in the big four importer for halal food, even though our country also having huge resources which actually can be enhanced and also can be it is possible to produce and be self-sustained in terms of basic needs like food or energy, especially currently there is an also idea about the renewable energy. So and then the issue about dependency also happen not only in Indonesia, but also in many Muslim majority countries as well. So even though we know that the only country that have not been fully independent is Palestine today, but even like for example in Indonesia, it has been more than 70 uh, years get our independence. But in terms of mindset, I see that there is one phenomena in I take this slide from Prof. Zaman classes regarding to the colonized mind, in which we see that we many Muslims see that Western is like superior. So we think that in many aspects, even in our education, in our politics, in our economy, we following the way of Western worldview, something that we as Muslim need to avoid it, and we need to replace with our Islamic worldview. So the things that our situation currently really, like for example in from economic perspective, we live in a market society, in a capitalist, in ribawi system, in which if we read our Quran, it is really far from the ideal situation. So um, with this phenomenon, I'm thinking that see Waqf can be a one way out in the future to address this issue. And actually, there are many studies that in these last 20, 30 years have acknowledged about the potential of Waqf. And at least there are three things uh, that can be a reason or why a Waqf is very potential. Because first is related to the Fardu Kifayah concept, in which like previously mentioned, in terms of economy, we and in many aspect of our life we have not been independent. So there is a necessity for us as a Muslim to be independent and at least to able to fulfill our basic needs. And Waqf is very potential with this characteristic because it is very potential to replace the current capitalist system. Because if in capitalist system, the one who has the capital is the one who has the power, and the way the system, current economic system work, make the rich become more richer and richer, and the poor become it is very hard to face the life. So the Waqf can uh, replace this make this this situation with the where the in the concept the Waqf is, while the capital is accumulated, it is not belonging to one person or some uh, or in several people only, because the asset will be owned by Allah, but I mean that the benefit then will be distributed. So there will be a like wealth distribution with this Waqf. And actually, the characteristic of majority Muslim, I believe that with the more awareness today with the religion, and also they like, for example, in my country, there is a kind of hijrah phenomena. I mean that more people are um, try start to aware that religion is very important to life, because uh, even though we are struggle to get money, but money cannot bring happiness to us. So for example, one survey that was done in last 2 years, last 2 3 years, mentioned that religion, the youth millennials acknowledge that religion is the one key to gain happiness. So there is an awareness that the teen is important, and more people are start to learn more about Islam and the religion. So how then about if we know that the Waqf is potential to address the current global economic issue and also socio-economic issue, how is the current development or the latest development of Waqf research? So as I mentioned, in the last 20, 30 years, more people do research about Waqf, and uh, it is seen as a part of the potential solution to address the global issue. And also there is a proposal to relate or to synergize, collaborate Waqf with like Islam, fintech, blockchain technology, and also the Islamic financial institution. But from my review, I see that most of the time the literature done in Waqf is explored from the Western perspective. I mean that we are using Western reference. Um, like for example, two that I can share, the Waqf core principle. So this is a good a governance principle that was initiated by Bank Indonesia in collaboration with IRTI, IDB, and also several um, Waqf institutions from several countries, including Indonesia, South Africa, New Zealand, and also several others, some other countries. So this Waqf core principle was adopted from Basel core principle. If some people here know or familiar with banking industry, so Basel is one guidelines that is used as a reference for banking sector worldwide. So to some extent, that yes, maybe we can take several which is relevant, but I'm thinking that there is like kind of like in terms of when we are referring to the West, we see that okay, like thinking West having good governance or we have to follow, there is a less exploration in terms of um, our main guidance, the research that explore how actually our uh, ulama or the previous scholars define or derived how they manage Waqf. So it is still less explored. Also, there is this is personally I has I have a huge worry here because there is in especially in my country, and there is a proposal that the banking will be proposed to be the Nazir, and the one who can manage the Waqf asset. I mean that ideally some justification is that because banking sector is the one who can manage in terms of technology, they are already familiar with the technology because mostly currently we are developing cash Waqf. So in terms of technology, they are the one who can catch up, but I'm afraid that because mostly banking, even Islamic banking, are owned by private. Um, I personally have concern if Waqf is not developed or based on true Islamic teaching, then it can be wrongly managed because um, private investors have their own interests. So I'm afraid that because they have own interest, it may trade the Waqf asset that should be maintained for the public or ummah interest. So there is the things that I think why uh, we need other approach in developing Waqf research. We in Wasid, so because Waqf has very special place in my heart, so I do research on Waqf and I established the Waqf Center for Indonesian Development and Study. So it is a research center, but specifically Indonesia. So in the last 2 years, we submitted an abstract and we got a travel award to present our paper, and it being published in the Ibn Khaldun journal. So we try to see the very rare literature regarding to Waqf. They explore the classical texts. So we try to do this from Ibn Khaldun perspective, but our limitation is because sometimes I personally have limitation with the Arabic. So why we choose Ibn Khaldun? Because there is already the book of Ibn Khaldun, Muqaddimah, already translated to English. So that is the one that we can access and we can explore. So we tried that things, but I think more research is needed in which it can accommodate the true principle on how Quran and our Quran and our Sunnah guide us on how to manage the Waqf so that it can unlock the huge potential of the Waqf. So because we realize that Islam is our way of life, so I believe that especially in terms of economic aspect and how Waqf can be developed, it should also be follow how is our guidance lead us. So this is the things that I think very relevant with the current phenomena when the Waqf research mostly explore from the Western perspective, because many uh, people thinks that Western have superiority in many aspects. So in the way we develop Waqf, we try to follow how the endowment fund was developed in the West and also other things. So I think that we have to have different approach. I mean, that is why I see Maqasid methodology will be very suitable on how to explore Waqaf should be developed so that it can really benefit Ummah and also can bring benefit for the Waqaf. I have not finished this research, so I hope can get many feedback from this session, especially from Prof. Jasser. But some that I have done, I did some preliminary research on how the concept of wakaf and also the some relevant verses in Quran, even though wakaf is not specifically mentioned. But I try to find several verses that is relevant related to charity. Also, some concept that because wakaf is the concept is giving the wealth of the asset of of ours. So I see that it is also relevant to explore how is actually wealth being defined in our Quran and Sunnah. So I also try to collecting and still in progress to collecting the relevant verses and also hadiths about charity and also about wealth, so that we can get a broader perspective on how the wakaf should be managed. But I personally, and this is my last slide, my last slide. So actually, uh, my personal limitation is about the access to Arabic literature. So far, what I done is reading the translation one. So like for example, this kitab Al Waqaf by Al Sirbini, I read in the English version that has been translated. So that is the main challenges that I faced in doing research on Waqaf. And the second is about the approach for istihad. One time I asked one of my friends who doing have background in Sharia, but how to do research. I mean that if I'm not mistaken, last time when attending class from Prof. Jasser mentioned that we have to do ijtihad in the area where we are in. So like for example, my area is on economy and finance. So how is actually the appropriate ijtihad that we have to do? This is the feedback that I expected and advice regarding to this, and also related to the what I have presented. I think that's all from me. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة.
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله.
الله يجزيكم الخير. Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa. ما شاء الله. Allah reward you and bless you, Ya Rab. Professor Jasser, I'm sorry, I should have opened the floor first to you to give an opening remarks. So how about we give you the floor now, maybe to
I
share
will
a few
inshallah.
words.
I will in the beginning. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أسعد خلقه وخاتم رسول محمد صلى الله عليه وآله ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. Like first of all, like before commenting on Dr. Lisa's presentation, let me start by congratulating her for finishing her Viva. Mabruk, mabruk, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this PhD for his sake and for the sake of serving this deen, and for you, inshallah, to have success with this for yourself, your family, and this life and the next, Ya Rab. Mabruk, inshallah. As an introduction, this is a follow-up for the presentations that I made on the Maqasid methodology and the new book that at that time was under publication. Alhamdulillah, the book is out now. There are some delays because of the COVID restrictions in terms of flying the book from Istanbul to different places. And therefore, let me know if you have difficulties. Inshallah, we can make sure that you get a copy of the book somehow so you can continue your research. For our researchers, we have a special way of delivering the book. So let me know, inshallah, if you have not received the book for your research, and inshallah, I'll make sure. Now, for that book, as I mentioned in the lectures, this was a collective effort. It was not just my ideas. Maqasid Institute researchers and fellows and students in our program in South Africa and different places that we taught in over the past several years have participated in the ideas of that book. And the ideas ended up with the methodology that I presented that would open ijtihad, as Dr. Lisa is talking about ijtihad, not just to be about fatwa. Fatwa is very important, it's part of Islam, but a major part of Islam is how to tackle issues of contemporary times, contemporary relevance, and how to deal with disciplines that were defined based on a non-Islamic background, concepts, objectives, and so on. Not to reject everything non-Islamic, but to have a dialogue, the question of how we can approach. And this is the first of a number of, inshallah, discussions that we could have on different research that all of you could carry out in order for us to build that kind of fiqh that we talked about. We talked about the wide concept of fiqh, and that fiqh is not just about the fatwas related to particular questions, but they are about reshaping disciplines and restudying phenomena from an Islamic perspective and strategies and so on, what we talked about in the course. Let me get into, inshallah, the presentation of Dr. Lisa. I think all of this is very important. What we're talking about here is a project for developing a new fiqh for Waqf. So this is the topic now. We have al-awqaf, and we have an inherited fiqh of al-waqf that has to do with the conditions of the waqif and how we dealt with waqf in our history. As we mentioned in the course, we are not going to totally abandon history, but we cannot copy history as well. One of the major problems is the blind imitation and copying of historical understandings of Islam and not building a fiqh that is contemporary and relevant to today. So the project, inshallah, that Dr. Lisa is going to work on, and we will make a call for researchers who would like to join her in a group that will research fiqh al-waqf, the fiqh of awqaf. Now, I'm very happy to hear that millennials are open to new ideas. And I see that everywhere in the world, where new researchers, like the next generation of Muslims, are happy to go beyond the traditional imitation, not to go beyond Islam at all. They are dedicated to Islam, but to go beyond the blind imitation of our books of history and to try to develop a new fiqh for politics, for economics, a new fiqh for social work and for family and so forth, um, to go beyond the imitation and the copying and try to develop new ideas. Um, I am cognizant of the problems of the Arabic language and how to deal with the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is not black and white. You could deal with the Quran and the Sunnah through translations as long as you define the basic concepts. And let me say that the basic concept in al-Waqf is fi sabilillah. Wherever in the Quran the way of Allah is mentioned, that is actually Waqf. And that is not from my mind. That is from the Prophet ﷺ when we talked about Waqf. In his hadith, Umar, let's say, and hadith Uthman and the others, when he dealt with Waqf, he called it at-tasbil, or to make something in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have fi sabilillah in the Quran hundreds of places. Yes, I know in the old fiqh, this was not considered exactly part of the fiqh of Waqf, but this should be part of the fiqh of Waqf. There is infaq fi sabilillah wa anfiqu fi sabilillah. From the first verses in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ, al-infaq, or spending. Now, spending in Islam has a particular philosophy because it has two kinds. One of them is permanent, which is the waqf, or the habs, or the tasbil, or the, there are many terms, and the terms are not as important as the meaning. The meaning is the same. And the other kind of infaq, or spending in the way of Allah, is the direct infaq. I feed somebody. The Quran talks a lot about feeding the poor, and or I free a slave, or these kinds of direct you know uh, direct spending. Now, half of what Islam is about in terms of spending is fi sabilillah, in terms of the tasbil, or the permanency of that. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, he told Umar that you can donate that farm or piece of land, but it's not going to be inherited, and it's not going to be sold or purchased. And you can dedicate what the profit of that piece of land is going to be for. This doesn't mean that in the Sunnah we only have one hadith of Waqf, which is when the Prophet said to Umar this. There are many, many hadith about Awqaf. And the companions, like in one of the hadith, not a single companion did not do a waqf before they die. These are all hadith. These are all students of the Prophet, والسلام, and these are all ways of making waqf. Now, to shift from talking about the companions all the way to today, yes, we can still do what the companions did. We have a farm, dedicate for Allah, we dig a well, sure. But today we have to develop the awqaf in a way that rebuilds our concept of Islamic economics. Because our sister, Dr. Lisa, mentioned, even with the Islamic banks, there is still a private interest. You see, the Islamic bank is a company, really, that's trying to maximize profits. And yes, this is very good. It's better to buy something through a bank rather than buy with interest. But this is not how the Waqf will develop, because the Waqf, as she mentioned, is something that's owned by Allah. The capital is owned by Allah. What is this concept? This is a weird concept. We don't have this concept anywhere. Actually, even in the Muslim world or the Muslim majority countries, the laws that protect the awqaf are not enough, and they don't guarantee that the waqf is permanent. Governments change, some laws change, and the awqaf are stolen. I was reading the other day an article about the awqaf in Egypt and how billions of dollars are stolen from the awqaf. People dedicate land for the sake of Allah, and then governments change, and then whatever they say, well, this land is for the army, this land is for this and that. They privatize the land, and the land is supposed to be for Allah. It's awqaf. Now, how can we develop that? There is a good experience, of course, in the Muslim world, Muslim majority countries, that we need to build on. We need to fight for the awqaf to take their place back after a long era of colonization. And the colonizers made sure that they destroy the awqaf, because the awqaf were not just the masajid or the mosques. The awqaf were the universities, they were the hospitals, they were the shelters for humans, for animals. They were how you feed the hungry and give the poor. The awqaf were even spending on the armies of the different parts of the Muslim world. The awqaf were the civil will, and politicians love to destroy the civil will because civil will goes against their interests. And when we, as Muslim majority countries, were colonized, the first thing that the colonizers did was to destroy the zakah and the awqaf. Um, and it's not just the Brits, and if we're talking about it's the Dutch and the French and the Russians. And look at the Russians did, for example, in the Muslim lands that they conquered. Um, they first of all confiscated zakah, and they equated zakah to taxes. So they take zakah from people, but they consider it taxes, and they put it with the government, subject to the government's whims. But the zakah is different. And then they destroyed awqaf eventually. Um, Post-colonialist era also was an era, even the awqaf were destroyed more. The army in Turkey, in Egypt, in Tunisia, you name it. I mean, there are cases that are very clear where Tunisian Bourguiba woke up in the morning and canceled the awqaf. Just that's it. That's it. And the Egyptian Nasser, the other dictator, woke up in the morning with the help of some fatwas from some Azhari scholars. He canceled the awqaf too, to a great extent, if you read details. What I would advise my sister Lisa to be careful with is to put Islam always in front of the West when we deal with awqaf. And I think Islam is not in contrary to the West. I'm speaking to you from the West here, and the Maqasid Institute is registered actually as an institute in the West. We could not register it anywhere in the Arab world or the Muslim world. They don't like that. So what I'm saying is that Islam is not against the West. Islam is against non-Islam. So when you speak about that, my sister, the best thing is to say the Islamic thought or the Islamic way of life versus the hegemony or the non-Islamic approaches or the colonization or the post-colonization. I agree with that. But the West, Islam is an integral part of the West, especially now. Um, Pre-Columbus, like I live in North America here, Islam was a major component of the culture that the Columbus and the Inquisition that he brought destroyed in the West. And now Islam is reviving back through the slaves going back, or the grandchildren of the slaves going back to their original faith, which is Islam, plus many people who contribute to life here who are Muslims. And it's the old generation that views Islam as alien to North America, I would say. The younger generation, speaking about the millennials, Sister Lisa, the younger generation don't view Islam as alien to this part of the world here in North America. Speaking about Canada and America, knowing them the most. And Europe's relation with Islam, the southern part of Europe, was a Muslim part of civilization for centuries. And in the north, many kings and princes and intellectuals had embraced Islam. But it's just how they write history and how they forge history and how they cut from history parts that are part of Muslim Europe. and how the Balkans, for example, is all Muslims. They are not considered part of Europe, but they are Europeans. What are they? Africans or Chinese? They are Europeans, and so forth. So Islam versus the West. Let us avoid that in the research that we do in the Maqasid Institute, and let's say Islam against non-Islam. Uh, to your main question, and I'm sorry I'm taking more time than I planned, to your main question, which is how can we approach that? Number one, to form a research group. Inshallah, we'll work on that. We'll make a call out for researchers and form that group to study the Quran. It is not accurate to say that the Quran has nothing on waqf, because every time in the way of Allah or fi sabilillah is mentioned in the Quran, this is awqaf. And this is one of the two kinds of fi sabilillah. Fi sabilillah to feed the hungry and so on, and fi sabilillah to build institutions. To go through the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and look for the seven elements that we described in that. And I can send you more detail, inshallah, when you read that book. The concepts. What is the concept of waqf? Al-mafahim. Fi sabilillah. What is the concept of perpetuity in Islam? Like constancy. How can we understand that concept? The concepts that are tied to awqaf have to do with what you spend on. And these are what the zakah is about and what other, education and so on. Fi sabilillah in general. Even one of the masarif of the zakah, fi sabilillah. And to me, and I wrote a long paper about that, this means that you can take from the zakah to the awqaf. I know that every other scholar in the past said no, but I don't see a problem with that. There is no order against that, and therefore, how can we integrate zakah with awqaf? This is maqasid and objectives too, and the sunan and the values, the qiyam, and so forth. So if we study the seven elements in the Quran and Sunnah, even through a translation, in terms of awqaf, then we are able to build a framework of concepts and a framework of objectives, and we try to see how we can build that fiqh. Now, when we build that fiqh, one of the steps that you mentioned, my sister, in the presentation, to compare with the literature. So we go back to the literature of awqaf and see what is fixed and what is variable here. And I assume that from my knowledge of the fiqh of the awqaf, most of it is variable. We can have new forms and new ways. And yes, we can learn from the Western experience. I live in Canada. We have two institutions that are very close to the concept of awqaf in Islam: the health system and the educational system. In this country, the health system is not under government. Like it's the hospital is not owned by the government. The hospital is basically a nonprofit, you know. And what does the government do? The government maintains a certain criteria or different levels of government, provincial, federal, etc. They maintain the standards for the health service, and they spend on the health service. And of course, that brings politics in, but then we can think about that. But that I can, like as a Canadian, I could say we should study the Canadian model of health systems, because as far as I read in the Islamic civilization, this is as close as we can get to the hospitals in the Islamic civilization that were awqaf. The other system here in this country and in the Western institution in general that I have taught in Europe and here is academia or universities. They are awqaf too, they are foundations. And yes, I know there is a lot of political influence and but at the end, the university is not owned by the government. When I worked in some Muslim world, I was a government officer. I was a professor, but I have a government ID, you see, because, when I was in different countries, without mentioning names, I had a government job. In Islam, this is not supposed to be the case. Education is supposed to be awqaf. In universities here, Oxford or Cambridge, or Harvard or University of Toronto here, it's a waqf in the sense that there's an endowment, there's an investment, and there are people who invest on the capital of the university, and the profit of that goes to the university. Why? To serve academic freedom. Not sure if we can change the pin, Dr. Afzan. To serve academic freedom in order for this to be basically free. Um, the sorry
Is
to
this better, Professor? Is this better, Professor?
I
Yeah,
I am
you want
not
to see
sure.
everyone?
Yeah, I can see everyone. Yeah, a gallery would be great because
Okay,
I couldn't see. I mean, it's just Jazakallah khair.
tamam.
Uh,
We'll keep it at the gallery.
Allah bless you. It's up to you, Sidi. But just to, so I'll finish here, inshallah, quickly. That I think it's important to study Western models of foundations and endowments and so on, because they were also very useful models that that originated from the Islamic civilization, by the way. Like, how did Southern Europe know about the endowments and foundations? They didn't have that before the Middle Ages. They knew it from Baghdad and then Andalusia and then Sicilia and all of these, emirates or kingdoms that employed the awqaf. Libraries were awqaf and hospitals and so forth. And if we are talking about Islamic economics, I think the awqaf have to be proposed as a central institution in the Islamic economics. How is a different question. Like, how can we move from the vicious capitalist system we are under today into a system that is based on awqaf? That is a big question, and that would require research as well. But I think it's possible. I think it's possible to work in parallel lines, to work in a line where we are trying to develop the Islamic way of economics in parallel to dealing with the system that we're under, realistically speaking, through the Islamic banks and the legal tricks and all of that. That is part of how to deal with the system. But as you mentioned, my sister, Islamic banks do not offer a solution that is based on awqaf because they are businesses. And we need to develop awqaf in a different way. And we need to work on the culture of awqaf. Awqaf is not part of the Islamic culture. It's my final point. It used to be whoever is dying or whoever has a big fortune, they put part of their will for awqaf. They donate for the sake of Allah, not for the sake of employing anybody or the new generations or any of that. No, and that's not part of the culture anymore. Because Islamic institutions are donated for by people who would like to manage the institutions they donate for. And that is wrong. That is not the Islamic way. The Islamic way is that you donate to a university and let the academics do the university. You donate to a mosque and let the imam lead the mosque. Don't tell the imam what to speak about because you donate to the mosque, you see. And that is a corrupt model that's happening today, that the person who runs the mosque, like here speaking about the Western countries, is the person who donates the most. It's the dentist or the whatever who donates to the mosque who tells the imam what to say. And in the Muslim majority countries, it's the government. Sometimes the imam reads a khutbah. Um, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. How can the mosque, as a waqf institution, be free? Hire the qualified imam and let the imam do their job. Hire the qualified professor and let the professor teach what knowledge is about. Don't tell the professor what to say and to serve a national agenda and all of this stuff that East and West, like even here, Islamic studies serve national agendas. So these are my comments. I greet you, Jazakallah khair, Sister Lisa, and inshallah, we will work together on making this group to research Al-Waqf. I know of a number of brothers and sisters who are involved with the Maqasid Institute who are interested in Awqaf. We were just, having a meeting a couple of weeks ago with some brothers in Lebanon who research Awqaf too in Lebanon and so on. So perhaps we can merge the two groups in a way to generate a new fiqh for Awqaf. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much. And congratulations once again.
MashaAllah. Waalaikumsalam. Jazakallah khair, Prof. Jasser, Auda.
Allah يجزيكم الخير. بارك الله فيكم. So how about this? I have some, I'll start with some questions and thoughts. And if you have discussion points or questions, if you can use the raise hand function, and we'll go in order, inshallah. Until then, I do have some reflections for both Professor Jasser and for Dr. Lisa. Professor Jasser, I just want to confirm my understanding of Waqf because, mashallah, this is probably the third time that I've been exposed to the discussion. And alhamdulillah, I believe that I have a good understanding or a accurate slash solid understanding of what it is. Is my understanding correct that the Waqf institution in Islam had such a power and was so powerful that its power was similar or equivalent to public governance, to al-wali, to the government. And that's why if I go back and I look, yani the wali or the sultan would have such awe and respect to the ulama because they're the ones who had, you can say, leadership slash authority over this powerful institution that is the will of the people, as you called it. Is that understanding correct?
It's correct, except for the role of the ulama. The role of the ulama with waqf is for legislation, for fatwa,
Hmm.
but they had no control over the waqf. You are right that the waqf was the most powerful institution, but it's most powerful because of the civil will, not because of the ulama. The ulama tried to protect the waqf by fiqh that made the waqf permanent and did not allow the government to intervene in the waqf and did not allow the donor to go back in their donation. And they gave fatwas that were very important, but they did not control the waqf. You see, the waqf was the hospital system. The government has nothing to do with it. The
Hmm.
waqf were the libraries. The public libraries were awqaf. The books were awqaf. We did not know the concept of intellectual property in the Islamic civilization. And I think there is a wisdom behind that. This is not because the Islamic civilization was primitive. It was because the Islamic civilization believed that knowledge is a right and that knowledge is not supposed to be sold or monopolized. Now we're suffering because of the vaccine and the monopoly over the intellectual property. The companies that have the secret of the vaccine, they don't want the countries to develop it. And if they develop it, they sanction them. You see, and people are dying, and they don't want to give up the intellectual property. In Islam, it's not like that. In Islam, medicine is a right, is not a business. And therefore, you are talking about an institution that is most powerful. Who owns it? Nobody. Nobody. Allah owns it. Allah owns most of the economy. And that's a very interesting concept. It's not owned by the government and they're not owned by, but they are regulated, if you wish, by the government. And eventually the walis as well, they also made awqaf. Whenever a wali has extra money, he builds a madrasa, but he doesn't own the madrasa anymore. That's it. The madrasa is owned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then there is a body of ulama. For example, I grew up in Cairo, London. Al-Azhar in the old times, studied Quran there and so on. Al-Azhar in the old times was a waqf that is run by Shaykh al-Azhar. Who appoints Shaykh al-Azhar? The scholars. There is a council of scholars that makes election and appoints Shaykh al-Azhar. Al-Azhar was not an Egyptian institution. That was post the 1952 coup, the military coup, that made Al-Azhar an Egyptian university and made Shaykh al-Azhar a minister in the government. The
Hmm.
pre the 1950s in Egypt, Sheikh al-Azhar was not necessarily Egyptian. At some point, was Tunisian, and were like it doesn't like these nationalities didn't really be part of that. And where did the Azhar get the professors' salaries and the sheikhs' salaries and the mosques from? The awqaf. Awqaf al-Azhar was huge. What the government did, the military government, they took the awqaf and they told Al Azhar, we are going to give you an equal amount every year from the government. And then the equal amount became 50%. And then it became 25%. And now they give them nothing. or they give them just to, this guy. So, which means that whoever donates is in charge. It's no longer awqaf. And Shaykh al-Azhar, even if he is a scholar of Islam, which is the case today, he is a true scholar of Islam, but he's a minister in a government. There are limits to what he can say or what he can do. Uh, the same thing with Zaytuna, the same thing with the awqaf of the other institutions. But when you have the Islamic education under awqaf, not under business, nobody's trying to make money, and it's not under government and the politics, this is different. And therefore, this research is very important. Yani. That's what I wanted to say. Allah.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Yeah, amazing. Allah jazakum al-khair.
Allah.
I'll save my other 2 points because of time and because, MashaAllah, there are some hands up. I'll give the floor to my brother Bilal.
Assalamu alaikum. I was quite interested, Sister Lisa, if you could go into a bit of detail about how the Basel Accord are incorporated with Awqaf, because my understanding is they are basically risk management guidelines for banking sector, which assumes there are people who are borrowing and these types of transactions. So how does that fit in with Awqaf if the Indonesian government is using it as a guideline?
Okay. May I directly answer, Dr. Azhar? Okay. So first of all, it is not initiated by the government of Indonesia, but it is part of it. I mean, the initiation was from the Central Bank of Indonesia, and they are in collaboration with IRTI, IDB, and also some Waqf institution from several countries. So the Waqf core principle, they justify that Basel core principle is suitable. In terms of Waqf is kind of also intermediary because mostly currently we are focusing on cash Waqf. So in terms of modus operandi, it is similar that Waqf is being mobilized, being collected, and then it will be managed. So it is kind of investment bank, how investment bank work, because they collecting money and capital and then invest in some prospective business. So with that justification, they use Basel core principle. But the things is, what I understand, the banking concept is about wealth accumulation. So the concept of bank is to accumulate the wealth, while Waqf is to distribute the wealth. So that is for me personally, I have a personal concern if we use maybe there are, as Prof. Auda mentioned, that there are several principles that really relevant, like for example about the risk management or about the asset classes. Maybe from the 29 principle, some of them are really can be relevant to Waqf, but we cannot enforce that all the 29 principles should be applied, because maybe it is not relevant and it is not priority, because we also have to acknowledge how is the reality. I mean, how is the existing competency of people who are managing Waqf. Like for example, in Indonesia, they are individual Nazir. I mean, individual Nazir. There are also more than 200 private Waqf institution in terms of like foundation or organization, but their background and their situation are really diverse and different. So we cannot expect the way banking was managed, because banking is a business, so they can enforce. But in terms of Waqf, it has a like metaphysic element. I mean that when people making Waqf, they do because of the sake of Allah. So sometimes people making Waqf not really check whether the Nazir is registered in the government or not. It is different with the way banking sector are working, because in banking, if it is the role of the government who has the authority to give the act. So really based on purely positive or legal created by the government. But Waqf, even though in Indonesia, for example, there is a Waqf Act, and they require the Nazir of Waqf institution to submit report periodically. Most of the Nazir have not been submitted. So this is another problem that in a way, Waqf institution is a trust-based institution, so we have to do good accountability as well. But we also have to acknowledge the people who are managing. If they are doing currently in Indonesia, most of them are part-time workers. So when they are managing Waqf, it is not their main profession because they don't get enough salary from the Waqf activities. That is the things that I think that Waqf really, many aspects can be explored in the way that how we can manage and how the best way we can develop Waqf model in the future, inshallah.
If I may add a little bit to what Dr. Lisa said, that is where the fiqh of waqf is needed, because sometimes the nazir or the principal who governs the waqf doesn't get enough salary, because 100 years back, when the people made the waqf, they said the nazir will get, let's say, I don't know, $1 every day. And then 100 years on, $1 every day is not enough. But we say, no, we have to go by what the waqif or the donor said. The fiqh is very strict about this, and that is wrong. The fiqh has to change in order for the nazir to get enough. Because if the nazir gets only a few pounds or a few lira or whatever, he or she cannot really govern the waqf properly. Also, the role of the government in maintaining standards. In that, the governments are usually very lax about awqaf in the Muslim majority country. They just let the awqaf do whatever they want. I remember back in Egypt, again, Mubarak time, Mubarak said on TV, do with the awqaf what you want. Like, just, he told his ministers, like, just do with the awqaf what you like. This is, open season, you see. But the awqaf have to be protected by the government, not just by the presidents and so on, but by law. Part of the fiqh of waqf that needs to be done, that perhaps Dr. Lisa could work on, is legislation for waqf. We need laws that protect that the waqf is owned by Allah, without making Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a citizen, of the state. Of course not. But how can we make that? How can we make that in order to protect al-awqaf?
Allah yazikum al-khair, Professor. Barakallah feekum. Again, if you have any reflection or points to add, just use the raise hand function. I have you guys are able to hear me, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. I have Professor and Dr. Lisa, a reflection. So my understanding of Waqf is that it is a holistic institution, and that institution works through organized collective work, professional, that distributes wealth, that collects from people. It acts as the will of the people. It collects and it distributes it through different means of good to people, whether it's through hospitals, schools, libraries, books, etc., whatever is meaningful. My question and reflection is, why can't we utilize, like when I described it that way, a lot of points are ticked with Islamic relief, with relief organizations. And for example, I'm thinking about Islamic relief. Islamic relief is, to me at least, worldwide and in Canada, one of the most trusted organizations and well-to-do organizations that proved success in the relief work in the Muslim majority and Muslim world. So is that an option to convert existing institutions that are global, that are, they tick many of the boxes, and they already have that trust relationship between them and the population, right? Because that's a big requirement. So is that one of the models, perhaps, to is that feasible to convert or to think about these ideas?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Azam. So, what I understand, sometimes people think that this is, I think, the misconception that conception that need to be clarified, that because Waqf is true that it has a social aspect, but actually the nature of Waqf is different with Zakat, where people are more social aspect are more dominant. But in Waqf, I see that the more dominant is about the productivity. I mean that the asset should be managed so that the benefit can be distributed. So that the things that maybe not really suitable is the dominance of social in the existing charity organization is the social aspect that is dominance. But we have also to accommodate the people who are having business background into the organization so that they can really do or invest the collected asset of Waqf to be invested in the really strategic. We are in Wasit in Wasit last time sent letter to Indonesian Parliament so to make an effort so that Waqf can be involved in renewable energy. That is one example because Waqf need to be placed. I mean that the collected Waqf asset in terms of cash or other asset need to be placed in the very strategic business so that it can be long lasting. So sometimes people think that if Waqf, then it is related to social. Yes, maybe the social is about after it is being managed, then it is for social activities, can be for education or can be for the needy, can help others. But there is a commercial aspect of the Waqf in which the assets will be productively and strategically managed. That is my, thank you.
Next question, perhaps, inshallah. You're on mute, Sheikh Azam.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Jazakumullah khairan. So because of time, how about this? How about we take two questions that are, Brother Sayyid Jamaluddin and Sister Dr. Claire, who have their hand up. We'll take the questions and then we'll answer them. Is that good? Type. So, Brother Sayyid Jamaluddin, welcome. The floor is yours.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Azam, and also Professor Auda, and also Dr. Lisa, mashallah, very great presentation, very beneficial. Thank you so much. I was just thinking, perhaps from the aspect that you also mentioned, Professor Auda, regarding that Islam and West is nothing of an alien, it's not a dichotomy, right? It's integral parts. We should instead criticize we're not against West, it's more like Islam and non-Islam rather. And I like that notion. And it's important to have that notion at the same time, as you also mentioned, Professor, and also Dr. Lisa, to have the decolonial thought still. But that is not to do with West only, even though Westerns did colonialize us. There is also a lot of very well. So I get that. And that is actually an interesting point of view. And then I thought when you said that could we learn from the Christian history in Europe, perhaps? Because in Sweden, actually, the churches used to be waqfs as well until the government enforced them to become governmental owned. So just very brief history about Sweden. I don't want to speak too much about it, but just for you to know why I saw that connection when you spoke, Professor Auda, that maybe that is a way to also engage with our non-Muslim people and to learn from their experience, and perhaps also find ways to provide for the waqfs in West, because we are minorities in West, to tell you the truth. We need to engage with other communities and with the majority society, of course. And maybe the majority society, and specifically the Christians, could relate to our suffering by relating to their suffering. So what happened in Sweden, the churches used to be waqfs, there used to be foundations, right? And then like 300 years ago, when Sweden became Lutheran, because we were Catholics, like I think until like 500 years ago or something, the government with the King Garfield Vasa is his name, they did like what the a lot of the Arab leaders done in Egypt and others that you explained, Professor Auda, they made the government owned because they wanted the money, because the churches were rich. So I'm not going to do that analogy too much, because the churches here were actually oppressing the people as well at the same time. So it's not a perfect analogy, but I'm guessing that I'm seeing that maybe advocacy, the advocacy part, which I am very keen to, and I'm very like, I have a passion for that, which we also discussed in the previous meetings we had. Maybe we can use that technique that you're mentioning a little bit, Professor Auda, and I got inspired by your thoughts to think about it. How can we understand the Waqf? How can we make others who are not Muslims actually support the Waqf? Because I don't think that the Swedish government understand what a Waqf is, to tell you the truth. A lot of our masjids here are Waqfs. They're not getting the support they need, and they think that they're owned by, you know, other Islamic states like Qatar or like Saudi or like Egypt, you know, which is not the case. There are coming some foundings abroad, of course. This is nothing to say, but they're not owned. So in a sense, we have this history, at least in Sweden. I'm sure UK has the same history. Many other European and North American countries have. How can we connect that? Is this a thought that is foreign? Or am I thinking wrong? Maybe this question is to you as well, Professor Auda. I'm thinking from advocacy and also to learn from others' experience, both within the Muslim Ummah, but also outside in the humanity. Because there is similar things. And I speak with some people from the Swedish church, representatives, who hate the fact that they're governed by the government, you know? And what the government has done in the Swedish church, this is very interesting. They have like a parliament, which is called the church parliament. So you have secular parties deciding the notion of what the Swedish church needs to do, the state church. And then you can understand the whole LGBTQ and a lot of these issues that actually we have a lot of common with the Christians and the Jews that are Orthodox Christians and Jews, by the way, or practicing, not the secular ones, that now they're changing like the whole narrative of what the church is supposed to do. And it's not only LGBTQ, it's a lot of other issues as well. So I'm just mentioning this because it is interesting to hear what we could learn and how we can collaborate with non-Muslims as well. Barakallah.
Allah yajzik al-khair. MashaAllah. Very good. Very good. I'll take one more question from Dr. Claire or a reflection. You had your hand up, but it's lowered now.
Yeah, no, it's still up in a way. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Again, it's a pleasure to be part of the group and the reflection. So thank you, Dr. Lisa. Thank you, Professor Auda, for these illuminating, reflection. So I have a remark and I have a question. The remark is really when you look into the book of history and you've highlighted this element that colonization came as a package. It didn't have to come just through, the army marching and conquering and like Bonaparte type of, way into Egypt. So it came in to dismantle things. And the first thing you mentioned, dismantling Awqaf in Algeria, this was the first thing that we finished it. The Bien Abu, just like eliminated, and the population then went poor, and they relied then on the French state. Same thing with, actually, you can think also about the reforms in the Ottoman Empire. I'm less familiar with that history, but I'm guessing that also 19th century, you can't think of the fall of the empire just post First World War. It's not true. I think it's a 100-year destabilization of the system. So now, having that colonial history in mind and living right in the thick of it, we are in the thick of it, because again, there is a military branch, there's a colonial branch, but there's a capitalist branch. There's it's ongoing, and all for the benefit of the state, the nation. So when I say we are in the thick of it, we're really all in the thick of it. So I'm just based on that reflection and these, I'm just wondering, or if that could be also a direction for our future research. How do we deal with what seems to be a irreconcilable, and paradoxical situation that we are trying to reestablish Waqf while still living within the nation state, while still dealing with, a neoliberal banking system. So I'm just, because also all this is new for me. I'm still puzzled. I mean, I see all the benefit. I'm all for public good, uh, but honestly, it seems that we are thinking about public good, but then the whole structure is needs to be reformed. And so I'm really, really like internally struggling with this. So I don't know if, yeah, we could perhaps have. I don't have the answer, and I'm sure. I mean, it can take ages. But if one direction of the future research that we do also, tackles this big problem.
Jazakumullah khairan. So before Professor Jasser and Dr. Lisa, I give you back the floor. I'd like to actually highlight, so based on the announcement, we said 3 hours, but we only have 2 presentations. So I'm expecting that we'll be together for 2.5, just so that we all are, on the same expectation. Like I think I'm expecting this discussion to go on for another 5-10 minutes, and then we'll take a quick activity break, and then we'll start the second presentation, inshallah, and hope to end around 10:30. So without further ado, please, we had 2 points from Brother Saeed Jamal and Dr. Claire.
Dr. Lisa, please go ahead.
I think the main question to Prof. Jasser, so please, Prof. Jasser.
Okay, khair, inshallah. I think a point that could address both of the comments, Jazakumullah khair, both comments are very real and we really need to think about them. But perhaps a comment that could address both is that the awqaf today falls under civil society or civil action or civil will. And perhaps this could be the entry point that when we say that we need to develop the fiqh of awqaf and the institutions of awqaf, we are actually talking about developing the civil society as a parallel power, as a parallel authority, not just the 3 powers that we have in a modern nation state, but also the power of the society, the power of the civil society. But the civil society will have to push the legislation and the executive in order to protect the civil society organizations like the awqaf. It's going to be complex, but this is basically, I think, how the awqaf could take a place in a modern nation state. Even though, as remarked, I mean, yes, it is by nature beyond the borders of a nation state and the hegemony of politicians. But within a modern nation state, it's good if we can research how we can protect the awqaf through the law, the current law, and how the law could protect these without falling under any of the other categories that compromise the role of the awqaf. I agree with you, Sayyid Jamaluddin, about the Christian organizations. Even in the early Christian time, early Christianity, when you read about the Nazarenes or the Nazarites, before they divided into believers and disbelievers, the believers, the followers of Jesus, they had a common resource. They really had some sort of a waqf that they relied on for their finances. And then the church was introduced and so on in the Christian history when you read that. And yes, the churches had their own authority, and it became the conflict between the church and the state and the competition over power. But we are talking also about a civil will. So we're talking about liberating the church as well from the government, as you are saying. Now the governments are controlling the churches. They did the same thing like the Arab leaders when they confiscated the awqaf. This is multi-faith. This is not just for Muslims, it's for every faith, and not just for faiths, for every civil will and civil movement that is trying to have an existence. Civil movements are combated by starving them, basically. This is the point now. When anybody who's trying to build a civil movement have a financial problem because the resources are being closed so that people with a different idea, Black Lives Matter, whatever it is, they are trying to put them to hunger, because when they are hungry, then they can start to rely on businesses and governments and so on. So this is to liberate the civil action, whether it is an action for social justice, for Islamic causes and social justice, of course, for Christians, for any other institution as well. So these are my comments, inshallah.
Allah يبارك فيكم, Professor. جزاكم الله خيرا. All right, we are halfway. Alhamdulillah. And yes, Professor.
5 minutes, you mean? Inshallah.
I have a quick activity, Professor. I want you to participate in. I'm just going to share my screen.
I have
Okay.
to make you do or come back, inshallah.
طيب, we'll give the 5 minutes, but this one will take 1 minute. So you guys see my screen right now. I know many of you, mashallah, come from all across the world, but maybe you don't know each other. So I want you to go to menti.com and I want you to use the code 9805 9873. And I want you to tell us, just type the country. Which country are you joining us from? And if you answer, you can go for your break. We'll come back at 9:26, inshallah.
5, 9, 8, 7, 3.
Yeah, I'll use mine as well.
Word.
I'm actually excited to see the results because I'm going to see the whole world right now, Doctor.
Oh, mashallah.
Malaysia, Canada.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Inshallah.
France, Allah.
Inshallah. Inshallah. We'll be back, inshallah.
Yalla, Professor. We'll see you, inshallah. Malaysia, Jordan, Canada. We're Palestine, mashallah. UK.